And I've seen lot of studies coming, and he is a ethical committee member also there. With the introduction of new subject for him, it's a, I think I have opportunity of meeting him regularly at API Bhavan. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
Start your lecture, sir, please.
And dear delegates, at the outset, I thank the organizers of KAPICON 2022 for giving me this opportunity to speak in this August gathering. The topic I will be speaking in the next 17 minutes would cover a broad overview of wearable devices in medicine and healthcare. Wearable devices, as you all know, are electronic devices which are worn on the body. They contain basically a sensor which senses several things, and it contains a microprocessor which processes the data, and it can either store the data or transmit the data to another device. There are various types of wearable devices currently available, starting from consumer devices like watches, fitness bands, etc., to medical grade devices like CGMS sensors, etc. They are small, portable, and they have an ability to connect to other devices wirelessly, either through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or NFC technology. And also they can be connected to cloud. And along with algorithms, machine learning algorithms, they are made to give smart output or intelligent output. The basic unit of any wearable device is a sensor. There are several types of sensors. Basically, mechanical sensors are one which detects motion. There are accelerometers, gyroscopes, altimeters. They detect motion, acceleration, position, and altitude of the person. There are physiological sensors which detect physiological functions of the body like heart rate, respiration, blood pressure, ECG, temperature, etc. There are biochemical sensors which analyze the biochemical analyte in the body like sugar, electrolytes, or even oxygen saturation. There are several types of wearable devices currently being used by consumers or in healthcare. Some of the devices which can be worn on the limb include watches, wristbands, rings, arm braces. Some of the devices can be worn on the head like goggles, glasses, helmets, and even headgear. Some of the devices can be worn on the chest or abdomen like chest strap, patches, vest, or belt. Even some of the sensors can be incorporated in the fabrics like shirts or shoes. And so there are several different types of devices available which may be useful in several settings, which I will be dealing with in the next few slides. Where all we can use these wearable devices in medicine and healthcare? There are various uses of these devices. One of the most important area where they made entry is in monitoring general health. When most of these watches, Apple Watch or Fitbit came into market, their main purpose was to measure the physical fitness of the individual and physical exercise of the individual. So they measure the exercise, they measure the heart rate, the sleep pattern, etc. Then they forayed into medical side when monitoring the chronic medical conditions like diabetes or hypertension or even Alzheimer's disease. They may be used for monitoring acute events in hospitals like ICU or step-down ICUs. They may be useful in monitoring patients remotely, which may help in telemedicine. And they are used in patient rehabilitation, patient training, medical students training, or medical education also. And it can be used, or it's being used in clinical researches. The area where the health devices are useful in monitoring health devices, I am sure most of you may be using Apple Watches, and the most important purpose we use is for tracking our physical activity like exercise. They count your steps, they count the distance walked, distance run, distance speed, the stairs climbed, the heart rate, the breathing rate, sleep hours, and in the next generation might also include monitoring your body temperature, blood oxygen saturation also. And by connecting to the mobile, by connecting to a smart algorithm, they are able to do much more calculation and predict much more important data like steadiness of the gait, the risk of falling in an elderly individual, the cardiorespiratory fitness like calculating VO2 max. And they are useful and can give usable and actionable insights. Say if you are wearing a watch, the watch will alert you that you are not done exercise today. They nudge you to do more exercise. Or if you have completed all the 3 rings, they say, good, you have completed all 3 rings today, well done. So they promote a sense of good lifestyle modification, good exercise in the individual. Using this further, taking the data from these devices, there are algorithms which are developed to predict the outcome of disease, like monitor the step counts of the patient and physical exercise and monitor their heart rate. They can even predict the possibility of insulin resistance in the individual. They're able to predict the onset of a viral infection, etc. Another area where these devices are currently being used is in monitoring, which can be useful is in monitoring cardiac care. Apple Watch can record a single lead ECG. There is a device called Cardiomobile 6L, I'm sure some of the physicians might have seen, which can record 6 lead ECGs. And there are ECG patches which can record ECG continuously for 7 to 14 days. And using the algorithms, by trained algorithms, they can detect hyperkalemia, a bloodless measurement of potassium in CKD patients who are prone to develop hyperkalemia. So just study the ECG pattern and predict the potassium level in the patient. The published studies on hyperkalemia detection by Apple Watch is available. It's published in JAMA 2 years back. And even for interventions, wearable devices are available. A wearable defibrillator cardioverter from a company called Zolink, which has a wearable device called LifeVest, which contains a ECG tracking device and a defibrillator paddle. On the back, it tracks the ECG. On the front, there are defibrillator paddles. So people who require implantable cardioverter defibrillator, like those who have severe cardiomyopathy, those who are prone to develop VTAC and others, they may be using these devices as a bridge therapy before they go for surgical implantable cardioverter defibrillator. It's a costly thing, costs about $2,000 to $4,000 for a month's use. So because it's being used in between the surgical therapy and the medical, it may save lives because in the patient, the waiting time may be considerable to get an ICD device. Next area where wearable devices may be useful is in monitoring blood pressure. We all know for office blood pressure is not reliable always, and we need ambulatory blood pressure monitoring for patients to detect masked hypertension, etc. ABPM is an uncomfortable procedure because it disturbs the patient by frequent inflation of the cuff. A device which can, so there are efforts to measure blood pressure without cuff inflation using different technologies, optical technology or pulse wave arrival calculation time or some other efforts which are being done to measure BP without cuff inflation. If we have a wearable device which can be worn on the wrist and if it can measure blood pressure, probably that's the best device which we can have for ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. A device which comes near to that would be a product from Omron Heart Guide, which is a wristwatch which has two small cuffs, one above the wrist and one below the wrist, which can measure blood pressure. Just keep on the chest and it records blood pressure in 10 seconds. So it's currently available in US, may be available in India also in future. One area where wearable devices have a firm role in practice is in diabetes care. We all know that CGMS, continuous glucose monitoring, is freely available. There are devices, these include a sensor which is implanted under the skin which measures the interstitial fluid glucose. There are three which are widely used. One is Freestyle Libre from Abbott and another one is Guardian Connect from Medtronic. In Guardian Connect connects directly to a mobile and gives you real-time blood sugar, interstitial fluid glucose readings every 5 minutes. Whereas the Abbott Freestyle Libre stores the data and it can be flashed to another handheld device by NFC technology. There were efforts earlier also to measure ambulatory glucose without the need of an invasion because this requires a needle to be inserted. So without obviating the need for a needle, wearable devices were being developed earlier also. In 2000, there was a watch which was from a company called manufactured a watch called GlucoWatch Biographer. From 2000 to 2007, the watch was available and it was later withdrawn for some fallacies in the reading. There is another company in UK which is developing a device called GlucoWise, which is not a continuous glucose monitoring device, but it's just a clip-like thing which can be kept on the space between the thumb and the forefinger or in the earlobes, which are highly vascular and thin. Using radio frequency waves, it measures blood sugar in about 20 seconds or so. It's currently under trial. There are several efforts which are done to measure glucose without blood in alternate body fluids like lacrimal fluid in the tears. So Google, a company called Wearable, and a Novartis company called Alcon, they were in joint venture to develop a contact lens which can measure glucose level in the lacrimal fluid. Somehow the project didn't do well and it is put on hold now because they didn't meet the success. However, another company called NovioSense is currently doing the same work on detecting lacrimal fluid glucose estimation. They say it's currently in phase 1 or phase 2 trials. Apple Watch was expected to record blood sugar but somehow the research met a roadblock, and we may not see in next 2-3 years that Apple Watch having a sensor for measuring glucose. Another area where these devices can be useful is in neurology, because most of these devices have mechanical sensors which can measure your gait, your steadiness of the gait, and which can be seen in your health app in the mobile when the Apple Watch is connected. So by calculating the walking steadiness, they can calculate the risk of fall. If you activate the fall detection in your watch, it can alarm the patient whenever there is a fall, and it can alert the healthcare giver or any emergency contact about the fall. So these are useful in patients with Parkinsonism, patients who are living alone, elderly people, etc. Even wearable devices which can detect seizure activity through electrodermal sensors and by using the muscle movements. There is a device called Empatica Embrace which detects seizure activity and can send alerts to either healthcare professional or a caregiver of the patient. There are rings which can measure, even smartwatches can measure your sleep, then the sleep pattern. Especially in sleep disorders like detecting obstructive sleep apnea, the ring devices, Oura ring is found to have sensitivity as much as conventional polysomnography, about 90% sensitivity compared to the conventional method of polysomnography. Along with sleep detection, they'll also measure the heart rate and other things. Remember, most of these things may not be directly measured values, but they are calculated or predicted values. But still they matches the traditional and conventional methods of measurement. Even in pulmonology, there are devices. A device called ADAMM can measure the activity bronchospasm. It just records the sound waves of the patient when he wheezes or coughs, or the crepitation sounds when the patient coughs. It can detect the exacerbations of asthma. It can predict the exacerbations of asthma by using intelligent algorithms. And it can detect the inhaler use and also can calculate the inhaler response, especially in children who are having respiratory illness like asthma in childhood. This can be a useful addition to monitoring those children by caregivers. There are several other areas where wearable devices are currently being used. In patients with severe peripheral neuropathy who have difficulty in walking, a sensor with the shoe insole inserted in the shoe insole can be, a special type of shoes can be made which can train the patient to walk without injuries. There ICU monitoring in patients, because we know in ICU we use multimodal, multi-para monitors which requires multiple cuffs and multiple wires. So if you have a wearable device which can measure blood pressure, which can measure saturation, heart rate, and even ECG, and connect it to a device wirelessly, probably it will make the life that much easy for the patient. There are several efforts also to develop sensors which can measure the biochemical analytes in the sweat, like measuring the lactate content of the sweat, measuring the sodium content of the sweat. These will be useful in sports medicine. Several clinical research uses longitudinal data gathered from mobile devices. Apple Heart Study is one such large study which was aimed to detect atrial fibrillation using Apple Watch. ePeople study was another study. Google Baseline Project, Precision Medicine Initiative. These are large, long-term studies using data from the wearable devices, consumer wearable devices. However, not all that is a rosy picture. There are several limitations for these wearable devices. The most important one would be the cost of the device. And because most of these devices are tethered to smartphones, the cost of smartphone adds up. So it's useful for a segment of population which are tech savvy and who are affluent. There are again inter-platform variability. A device which works on Android may not work on iOS and vice versa. Then the low battery life. Even your Apple Watch you need to charge twice daily. So long battery life is one which is essential for long-term monitoring of the patient. Inaccuracies. Even the step count of many of the devices may not be accurate. So how can we trust such important health data in those devices? So these are the concerns. Some of them may raise false alarms. Some of them may not detect abnormalities, so it might be passed off as normal. And again, there is the issue of regulatory oversight. Because many of them are consumer devices, over-advertising by the companies can push people to buy these devices with the purpose of monitoring their health, and they may receive false alarms or false alerts which can increase their healthcare costs. However, the future looks promising for this device industry. Currently, the industry is estimated to be about 20 billion US dollars per year. The market is worth 20 billion US dollars per year. Even in our country, last year, the Apple Watch and Fitbit had shown a growth of more than 100% year over year. So it's a fast growing market, and the most focus in these devices is currently on healthcare. So in the coming years, if properly used and if proper research is put in place, it can transform remote monitoring of the patient, especially in telemedicine. When telemedicine is taking off, probably this can be a big future benefit with wearable devices. And the integration of multimodal units into a single device. Instead of having 10 devices which are worn on the body like jewelry, you have one device which gets many data and analyzes the data and gives reasonable, actionable inputs. A multimodal unit put in a single unit probably would be the future. And non-invasive monitoring of the biochemical products like blood sugar, monitoring of potassium, monitoring of sodium, lactate, this would hold promise for the years. So in summary, wearable devices have wide application in technology. They can be useful in hospital, in home, in remote areas, and in low access, low resource settings. They collect the data, multiple data, they transfer to a device or cloud, and from the cloud it can be transferred to health practitioners, which can be used with the help of artificial intelligence by giving useful inputs to the patient. They are useful in variety of medical settings. There are several challenges and limitations for wide application of these devices in device. However, with integration, this may be possible to develop a useful alternative and useful addition to healthcare setup in future. Thank you. I conclude this talk with this slide, which is a trivia information, which is not related to this topic. This is a bird where wearable technology is used since years. You know, the bird is wearing a collar. To study the migration of birds, the people who capture this bird comes from Mongolia to all over India. You can see this bird in Mysore, Gadag, Hassan, everywhere. So they capture the bird, put a collar. So depending on the type of collar you use, you can track the bird movement wherever it travels, the distance it takes to travel, all those things. So I just thought it probably linking this to healthcare devices where we are heading. Probably we took the clue from this science, ornithology, and we are moving towards that. With that, I end my talk. Any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Srikanth. Excellent, wonderful. And the last slide was the best actually, because we can keep a track on somebody's life. So one main question here problem is whatever machines are taking over human beings. Then what is the role of medical colleges? Tomorrow what I should teach? What is pulse? What is blood pressure? What is respiratory rate? What is BSV? Why do you need so many doctors? You should tell government not to open colleges and stop opening new colleges at least. Because machines are coming, one. Yes. Second, the accuracy of machines often questionable. Third, accountability of machines are often questioned. Here something goes wrong, doctor held responsible. Here I don't think machine can be held responsible. Where do you see machines in India in future?
Yes, sir. Very valid question, because these are the initial stages of these devices being put into market. There are several concerns. Number one, first is regarding the machines replacing the human. So no, they will complement the human practice. The man uses these inputs and becomes an intelligent man. So that can be put to better use of patient care. That is one. Second, regarding the regulatory oversight. As of now, the regulatory oversight is much rigid. So consumer device, you developing Apple Watch for measuring SpO2 may not require FDA approval. But for an ECG recording, it requires FDA approval. So most of the devices to put into medical use, they require FDA approval. The question of legal, when it comes to accountability, this is a gray area probably where we'll have to discuss in the years to come. When these things move forward, probably it will self-evolve and self-generate the legal framework also.
We must definitely congratulate Dr. Hegde for this fantastic lecture. Let's put a huge round of applause for this wonderful lecture. Why we are talking about this particular technology as such is, it is in to stay. It is the future. So all of us need to get accustomed to something like this. There is a learning curve in any technology that comes up. Unfortunately, healthcare has got the maximum benefits to derive from technology. But healthcare has been a laggard as far as adopting technology to its adopt this technology to our day-to-day practices. This last 2 years of COVID has enormously transformed this adopting technology to our healthcare practices. And whatever Dr. has been talking about, it's already been there and relevant in use. As much as my co-person talked about its reliability, these are all learning curves, and there would be enormous amount of research that goes in to make it as precise and as precision based practice as possible. So we are in the right direction, but let's not get completely overawed by this flamboyant picture that is there, but we have to adopt this and make sure that this is going to become an integral part of our practices. Are there any questions from the audience? We would be happy to take them up. Yes, please, Doctor.